Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Gavin Drake. I'm part of the marketing team here at Nicus and want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy day to be with us and to invest in your learning and development. You can use the Q&A to ask questions related to the webinar content, and we'll aim to answer as many of those as we can once the formal presentation is complete. And I also want to make everyone aware that we're recording today's webinar. When we first started talking about this topic of ITFM versus FinOps at the beginning of the year, it elicited a lot of interest. I think for some people, confusion as to what the difference is. For others, just wanting a deeper understanding of how these two critical areas work together. Either way, what we know is it has never been more important to have a tight control on technology spend across the business, optimize spend, and deliver value. And with that in mind, I can't think of a better person to deliver this content to you today than Nicus's Chief Customer Officer. Robert was a co-founder of Nicus. He has more than 25 years of experience in IT financial management, loves many things in life, including food, whiskey, but I know that he loves to teach and inspire and spends much of his time with our customers in the day-to-day of what it takes to be successful running an ITFM practice. So with that, I'm going to bow out and pass you across to Robert to take you through today's packed webinar content. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. We'll stick to teaching at the moment and save the whiskey and the food for later. Can I validate with you, Gavin, just really quickly? I'm sharing effectively. You can hear me and we're ready to go. All right, sounds good. So let's start with a couple of things. As we talk about ITFM and FinOps, the first discussion, or topic is, do companies need both? And some observations from the marketplace, in Flexera 2023 report. It's actually a pretty good report. This Flexera 2023 State of the Cloud report that comes out every year. For those of you that are Flexera customers, get your hands on it. They do obviously a new version every year. There's some great observations in it. It gives you good insights into where the industry is going and the domain is going. But one of the statements that they made in the 2023 report was that the majority of workloads for customers now is in the public cloud, right? So that's a big step, that we've taken. Another is that organizations are turning heavily to FinOps. It is quickly becoming the standard framework for cloud financial management and cost control. Two things that, we want to talk about is, how these two practices, frameworks, practices kind of overlap. So that's something we're going to be looking at. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how FinOps is talking about expanding, right? It's an industry standard, it's a framework. But as I'm talking to other industry analysts in the space who actually talk to the leadership, in FinOps, they are contemplating moving beyond cloud, right? So today's focus is going to be, comparing ITFM to the current FinOps framework as it is, but it is potentially going to be expanding. Where I'd really like to start, just to set a baseline, right? Some of you are probably very familiar with FinOps, maybe some of you aren't. I want to start with a definition of the framework and kind of take you through that, right? So first of all, what is it, right? FinOps is, first of all, just from a naming convention, right? It's combining finance and DevOps together. And this is simply meant to be a framework to really help organizations optimize their cloud spend, maximize the value they're getting out of it, and drive accountability in the organizations where cloud is being heavily used, right? That's what the framework is all about. There are 6 core principles in the framework. They're all relatively simple. As I go through them, you'll quickly understand them, and you'll also quickly see some alignment and overlap to what you're doing with your TVM and ITFM programs. The first is collaboration. And the collaboration is really between, or intended to be between, 3 parties. Finance, right, who's trying to manage the spend and manage the forecast. The business that is actually acquiring it, and the engineering teams that are in IT that are also trying to leverage cloud, right? When you think about it, cloud is being purchased sometimes by the business directly to support any types of compute and other product needs they have, sometimes inside of IT. Service leaders and product managers are acquiring cloud to directly or indirectly provide supply to the services that they deliver to the business, right? But we want that collaboration for those three different parties. The second is ownership, or maybe you call it accountability, right? Whether it is an IT leader or an IT service owner who is acquiring cloud in order to satisfy business demand to deliver a technology to the business, or it's the business themselves that is acquiring cloud technology directly, we want, and the framework wants, to drive that accountability and ownership for each of them. We want each one of those buyers to take responsibility for the spend, track it against budget. So that means some decentralized decision-making is occurring in this framework, right? It's with the buyer and the accountability. The next is transparency. We want data to be available in a couple of different areas to all these decision makers, these three different parties. We want timely data. We want it to be near real time. The other thing that's interesting about cloud, a lot of times with ITFM, our practices kind of operate on quarterly boundaries, monthly boundaries. Cloud is changing so quickly and consumption is happening so rapidly that you really want more near time or daily insights into cloud spend and what's changing. And then one of the things we need the data to tell everybody that's a buyer or really any of these parties is what's driving my variance. It's almost always, something new that got provisioned, something that got taken away. Maybe the cost makeup changed, maybe the rate changed, but people need to be able to look at this data and quickly understand what's driving that change in spend and obviously validating it, right? And we want the data to help us with benchmarking. I think an element of the benchmarking that is probably really important is just doing cost comparisons and understanding, hey, I have product X that I could really buy from several different suppliers, and I want to, be able to compare those rates and those service levels. That's a part of it. But also being able to even compare within one cloud provider, maybe I could satisfy my need with three different ways of buying it, right? Something that a good example might be, I might be able to buy a particular cloud product in a very variable way where I could dial it up and dial it down anytime I want, and it's highly elastic, right? Versus I want to buy a reservation or something that's dedicated over time. And of course, at different times, it's nice to have those different options, right? Variability usually comes with a little bit of a premium. So if you're unsure about your consumption, right, you might lean more into the variable. If you're very confident about what you're going to be consuming over time, you might be able to commit and get yourself some price discounts, right? So those are important elements of it, but transparency, right, is important. Got to have data to really drive all this decision making and manage it. We want a centralized team in the framework to manage this process. And obviously, one of the questions that we're going to answer, we're going to address it a little bit later. One of the questions that we constantly get when we present this content is people will ask, am I going to have an ITFM team and an IT finance team that's going to be separate from a FinOps team? Or are they going to be combined? Or is there going to be kind of a sub team with an ITFM that's FinOps? So we're going to talk about where people are a little bit. There's some different ways that people are going about that. But we'll revisit that topic in a little while. We certainly want executive buy-in. Honestly, that's obviously something that's important with any kind of program, right? A TBM program, an ITFM program, a FinOps program. Your program is not going to run very smoothly and get much investment without effective executive buy-in, right? And maybe one of the other ones is removing the need for engineers and operations teams to really think about rate negotiations. And I think the observation there is that's not their skill set, right? Engineers are engineers. They're not good at managing a business relationship or a vendor relationship. So We want somebody on the centralized team to be able to handle that, or somebody in a vendor management function. The next principle is being value driven. You know, I think we went over the last decade through this pivot from just looking at cost to looking at value. But I think cloud is such an important technology that can really drive value in the business that cost becomes secondary. If we can validate that we are leveraging cloud technologies to really support things that the business values, then the cost is not quite as important, right? And then the last FinOps principle is leveraging the variable cost model, right? We want to be able to put yourself in a position where you can be elastic, right? And you can shrink and grow your cloud. What we don't want to happen is we don't want to be going out there and making the wrong purchase decisions at the wrong time and putting ourselves in a position where every 3 or 6 months we've got to go out and clean up some of our cloud purchases because we didn't make the right decisions in terms of volume or products. We want to be more proactive and make sure we're making the right decisions to optimize our spend effectively. So those are the core principles. I wanted to start with that as a foundation. So now let's kind of jump into, you know, what do these two practices share, right? What's the shared focus? And of course, as I went through that, if you look on the right-hand side here, the different core principles, I said, you know, a lot of these are going to look like ITFM, right? Collaboration. We want collaboration with ITFM between IT finance and the business and the technology leaders. With those three parties, we want to be brought together. And that very much aligns with what the FinOps Foundation is saying they want as part of their framework. We want to drive ownership and accountability. Of course, we've been doing that with showbacks and chargebacks and TCOs with ITFM for years. We want transparency. That's part of what ITFM is all about, right? You can't manage what you can't see. So we want to share and be transparent with as much of our costs as possible. We want a centralized team, right? An IT finance team, mature ITFM programs, TBM programs have a centralized team that manage the program and the operation and interact with IT leadership, IT service and product owners, and the business, right? We certainly have become value driven with ITFM. So the thing that really sticks out as one of the few things that is different from a focus perspective is, okay, ITFM isn't really focused on leveraging that variable cost model because that's a cloud specific element and it's a part of the FinOps framework, right? And then if you start to just look at what FinOps is doing and how the framework is being used just in that cloud segment, you start to see a lot of the same practices getting executed on as ITFM, right? FinOps enabling a cost allocation or a showback or a chargeback or managing forecasting or budgeting. Again, just having that cloud focus. So this is where, you know, this practice and framework are really overlapping. So let's look at where things are different. That's what this is. On the left, we have ITFM. On the right, we have FinOps. ITFM is looking at all IT spend, not just cloud, right? And we care about everything, telecom, labor, you know, all kinds of infrastructure, whether it's on-premise or elsewhere, network. There's not a dollar in the IT budget that ITFM doesn't care about. FinOps is focused at the moment on just cloud spend. The other thing about ITFM is it is generally as a quality program, right? If it's mature, it is a top-down focus. It's usually driven by the office of the CIO and senior IT leadership, right? FinOps is usually more of a bottom-up approach. The operation is more about engineers and practitioners who are leveraging cloud within the organization. And then, of course, on the ITFM side, we've got to look at both macro views of costs and benchmarks, as well as the granular view and dig into the details. FinOps is that more granular view, right? And I found this Gartner quote, to be interesting, that, Gartner predicted that most FinOps adopters will need additional ITFM capabilities in order to manage the total cost of the cloud. And it's honestly, from my perspective and experience, it's just the maturity of the framework, right? ITFM and TBM have been around for 2 decades. They have been maturing their practices and their execution. FinOps is a newer framework with kind of this laser initial focus on cloud. And it doesn't have all the whistles and bells and the depth of capabilities within the practice. So this is where the two are a little bit different. So there's some gray area too, right? ITFM has, but FinOps is missing, right? Internal labor costs, software and SaaS application costs, cloud management costs, security, infrastructure costs, facilities, networking, telecom. Again, we talked about this in the prior slide, right? But the implications of this is that FinOps isn't effectively making sure you're managing all of your costs. It's making sure you're managing a segment of your costs, right? And then we're only looking at some of our data. We're only looking at some of our costs, and we're only understanding part of the value picture. So if you're thinking, hey, do I want FinOps or ITFM? You really, FinOps doesn't have anywhere near, the depth to really manage IT spend across the board, right? Even necessarily all of cloud related spend, right? What kind of synergies exist, right? We can definitely say that a FinOps framework is critical. We want to be able to prioritize those investments, make sure we're making the right buying decisions to align with value, right? But these two, they're complementary disciplines, right? ITFM and FinOps could potentially work together, right? The overlap doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, right? We certainly can exchange data and share insights, and the different perspectives actually could be, if it's used effectively and both programs are used effectively, a benefit, right? So let's talk a little bit about how FinOps and ITFM work together. No question, before we even begin, there's a huge optimization opportunity here, right? Being in a position where we know almost everybody that buys cloud, or a significant number of them, can reduce their cloud costs. McKinsey says 30%, whether it's 10% or 20%, or it's 50%, whatever it is, there is a huge optimization opportunity in your IT spend. So this is a really important practice. And actually, Gavin said I've been doing this for 25 years. I've been doing it a little longer than that, but long enough to recognize that in technology, about every decade or so, a new technology is introduced, right? We had a decade we went from centralized business computing and mainframes to client server. And then we went to another decade of virtualization, and then another decade of cloud. And all of those new technologies almost always begin in a very unoptimized way, right? Spend is initially out of control. Organizations, IT, and the business are so anxious to leverage those technologies for a business advantage that they spend and spend and spend before they actually begin to manage it. And that's part of what creates the optimization opportunity, right? We want to step in and get our arms back around it. We're talking about FinOps and cloud today, but this is quickly coming with AI. I report to our CEO, who was at a conference recently and spent a bunch of time with a bunch of CIOs. And of course, his questions were, what are the things that are most important to you, and what technologies do you feel like you have to deliver to the business effectively, right now? And they're just like AI. And when we asked the follow-up question, well, what does that mean? How are you going to spend it? And they all said, we don't know, right? Again, it's just another example of a newer technology that is being acquired and leveraged before it's really effectively managed. So optimization opportunity. Everybody probably agrees with that, right? And then if you want to optimize, most people have a limited understanding of the full cost, right? They just get a fraction of the cost of just a component of it. ITFM looks at everything. FinOps is kind of just looking at the direct purchases. So getting that view of that full cost becomes really important. And this is where ITFM and FinOps can really work effectively together. ITFM can provide that full picture and full cost of everything that goes in to delivering these cloud technologies to the business, not just the cloud purchases themselves, right? Another observation is, and this actually is from research and survey data that FinOps did themselves. One of them is that ITFM and FinOps generally aren't aligned. So I'm getting back to the question that I asked myself, right? That I said a lot of our customers ask, and that is, what is everybody doing? Do they have separate ITFM teams, separate FinOps teams? Are they aligned if they're separate? And what we found is that 50%, or the FinOps survey found, right? 50% of people that are out there, this is beyond our customer base, it's the FinOps. They either don't have ITFM along with FinOps, or if they do, they run as independent operations, right? And only 8% have a unified FinOps and ITFM. And I'll take a second and share my opinion here. Given the makeup of the IT finance teams and TBM teams that are in place, it strikes me that it would be substantially easier to just augment with a resource or two, and obviously that has to scale up in larger organizations, kind of an arm of a FinOps, so that FinOps to me should almost be something that folds right into the ITFM or TBM program, keeps it aligned, and can maximize how the two can effectively work together. I think there are some very serious inefficiencies in keeping them separate. And we'll talk about this a little bit, right? So when we look in the marketplace, what do mature customers look like versus immature, right? Maturity looks like ITFM and FinOps are being integrated, okay? Seeing some element of shared tagging, right? First of all, if you just talk about tagging strategy, organizations that have a strong tagging strategy are all of these cloud providers, Amazon, Google, Azure. As you acquire products, you can actually tag the purchases so that within the systems that are monitoring the consumption and the cost, it is tagged with what that purchase was made for, tagged with whatever you want to tag it with, but obviously tagging it with what application you purchased for, who owns it in the business, why it was purchased, what cost center it was for. You can imagine any number of things that would be useful. But having a good quality tagging strategy is something that you see in mature organizations. Low maturity, you either don't see tagging yet because they haven't really put a strategy in place, or they put a strategy in place a little bit late and they're trying to retrofit it, right? Maturity looks like standardized and shared data, right? We want transparency, we want accountability. It's a real important element of the framework to be able to share decisioning information to finance team, to IT leaders who are managing the cloud technologies, and engineers who are managing delivery of the technologies, and to the business themselves, so they can all make these really, really quick decisions about how they're leveraging these technologies. And then a common tool set. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about tools in just a minute here, but you can imagine you build up an ITFM TBM program, you build that up as people, process, data, tools. And we want to see in a mature environment those tool sets being shared by ITFM and FinOps, right? And maybe ITFM TBM tools can even cover off a big piece of the FinOps, depending on what tools that you have, right? As you're bringing them together, we want to be able to have that alignment. Again, if ITFM and FinOps are combined, like you're in that 8%, and I kind of feel like that's the leaders that are in the space in terms of maturity, then FinOps is part of or a component of the TBM or ITFM team and program. But even if they're not, we want to make sure that they're very aligned. They're exchanging data, right? And we're communicating with each other effectively. We just don't, low level of maturity, we just don't want to see these two things as independent operations. That's going to have a lot of inefficiencies and disconnects. So let's talk about a couple challenges, a couple use cases in bringing FinOps and ITFM together at a program level, right? Do we have competing priorities or do we have aligned priorities? That's going to be a challenge. If the two are separate, they might have different focuses and have different goals and competing priorities, where if they are highly aligned or they are combined, we're in a better position, right? We're talking about an overlap of stakeholders as well, right? So engaging stakeholders, if we have very, very highly bifurcated processes, that's going to create a challenge with two independent parties engaging all those stakeholders rather than being together, right? So we want to educate everybody on, hey, this is what FinOps is in our organization. This is what ITFM and TBM are doing for us. Here's how we're aligned. Here's our outcome focus. We both want the same things, right? ITFM is focused on making sure we're delivering value with all technologies across the enterprise and transparency and accountability. So making sure that, you know, those are the outcomes that both programs are focused on is really important. And then communication is important for both programs to really be successful. And of course, that can help with, you know, the stakeholder engagement. By the way, I know there's questions coming in a couple of different spots. We're going to grab them at the end. But, you know, a common taxonomy is probably a nice thing. If you think about, for those of you, and I can see, I recognize some names of some of you, but I know a lot of you are probably out there in the space and have a lot of experience with ITFM and TBM, and you know that establishing a common technology taxonomy to communicate cost across the enterprise is just so important to success. And FinOps is no exception, right? We don't want to have a FinOps taxonomy and framework and an ITFM taxonomy, right? And then we're trying to socialize that across the enterprise. That obviously would be really challenging, right? So some recommended steps, mapping cloud service provider products to your services and your taxonomy, right? So having some form of a crosswalk at a minimum. I mean, maybe ideally you both share a common taxonomy that you've been able to establish, but even if you have to have kind of a sub taxonomy for cloud, you have a way to kind of map that in. And of course, you know, one of the other challenges with cloud service providers is all their product offerings are a little bit different. It's not like they're not purely widgets, right? They have different product codes, different rate structures, different support offerings, and they're always shifting them and changing them all the time. You don't want your customers internally in the business to be dealing with that constant state of change. You want to be able to say, listen, this is, you know, the 10 different types of products that we effectively buy from the cloud. And you always present to the customer in that standardized taxonomy, and you deal with crosswalking any of the changes for the cloud service providers, product names and product codes and things like that, to just make it easier for your user community to be able to digest the data quickly and not constantly have to relearn taxonomies and service codes and things like that, right? Look, I said we'd talk about tools a little bit. I think this is an important thing for everybody to understand. The three products that we see at a high level of maturity, and all three of these provide a distinctly different value right now, right? One is a CMP on the left here, the cloud management platform. That is something typically owned by IT, by the engineering teams and leadership. It's focused on managing provisioning. It's focused on managing policies, doing orchestration, optimizing resource utilization. So there is a cost optimization element to it, but it's more from an orchestration perspective and being able to move workloads around and making different decisions about, hey, this cloud provider and this cloud technology is better suited to satisfy this business need than the other one. And the IT engineers need to be able to shift those workloads around and orchestrate those things. The business doesn't care. The business is like, I need X amount of this. If you get it somewhere that's 2 cents per unit cheaper and delivered at a higher level of service, well, the IT engineering team needs to be able to go do that. In the middle, we have our ITFM or TBM products that are focused on a lot of things: budgeting, planning, bill of IT, doing showbacks, doing total cost of ownership, doing cost models, looking at all spend, not just cloud. So for ITFM and TBM, cloud is just an integration point, right? A typical ITFM or TBM tool is going to be going out and getting data from 10, 20, 30, 40 different systems. Cloud is just 1 or 2 or 3 of them. That's all it is, right? And then, of course, we have FinOps. And I don't know that we are necessarily talking about getting your hands on a FinOps tool. This is more the FinOps framework, because you can execute everything, all 6 components of the FinOps framework with these other 2 products, right? Or these other 2 tools, CMP and ITFM, TBM, right? But this is how they look: 2 tools and software package in column 1, software package in column 2, framework and discipline in column 3. But we're talking about them all as tools. Right? Some data from the FinOps survey that maybe you'll find interesting. What are people using integrated ITFM and FinOps for? Chargeback is one of them. Let's broadly say that could be showback and chargeback, right? Because I think both disciplines are looking at driving accountability and providing certain levels of transparency to support decision making. TCO falls into that same category. It's interesting that forecasting is a little bit low. 19% strikes me as how are you going to be making sure that you are making timely, effective spend decisions and not making the wrong decisions if you don't have a mature forecasting process wrapped around cloud? So that 19% doesn't feel like a good number to me. I'm sure it's accurate and people are responding correctly, but I guess what I'm saying is people should be doing that more because they're creating inefficiencies by not effectively having a mature forecasting process around cloud, right? And then optimization at 19%. So this is what people are out there looking at according to the survey. So, I think some of you are familiar with these disciplines, but some it might be new, right? So if you're doing a showback or chargeback, these are some of the types of things that you are trying to gain. These are some of the outcomes and results you're trying to create with having a chargeback component to your program, right? You want to have a fair recovery of costs. Certainly in the private sector, you might be hitting business units P&L, and you want to be fair about how you are recovering costs for different types of technologies that you deliver to the business. Cloud just being another one, right? And certainly we're seeing different versions and hybrids of how cloud costs are being managed or allocated in organizations. We see some organizations where the business is a very heavy buyer of the technology on their own, so it's in their own budget. We see other organizations where the spend is more centralized inside of IT, and there is a chargeback, right? And even a markup, right? Where IT will make the cloud purchases, but of course, there are a lot of other indirect costs that go into delivering those cloud technologies to the business. So there's some form of markup to recover the remainder of those costs. Chargeback, showback wants to improve visibility and accountability, want to be able to optimize costs. wrapped around decision making, right? That goes back to, being able to see rapid changes, clouds changing. I see it all the time, just use case examples where people will start to share detail level cloud data to the people that are accountable for that. And optimization decisions start to happen very quickly. They'll see, oh, I'm over provisioned in this area, or we turned this on and we forgot to turn it off, or they jacked the rate up on this particular service. I don't want that service anymore. I want a different service. And just sharing all that information quickly triggers some very simple optimization decisions that are just blocking and tackling, right? We obviously want to make sure with a showback, chargeback, we're putting our end users, we're putting our buyers, our IT customers, if you will, in a position to pull levers and make decisions for themselves about how technology services and resources, cloud and otherwise, are used, right? So that's kind of a chargeback, showback. I think TCO is similar, but TCO is kind of more of a transparency exercise. We're going to tell you how much, the total cost of ownership is for a particular application, and cloud is a component of that, right? And we're going to figure out how much we're spending on different functions that we're delivering to the business, different products, all these different logical views. But the important parts are, we're showing you the total cost, right? The fully burdened cost. We are doing that in different dimensions and different ways. How much for applications, how much for products, how much for technology services, right? And in a lot of cases, we're just trying to help the business understand what we're delivering to support those optimization efforts, right? So kind of related to chargeback, right? Maybe not hitting the P&L, maybe just sharing information and being transparent to really enable these different types of decisions. And obviously, a big challenge with both is, that tagging and identification strategy, also being able to find all the data that you need to build that out and constantly refresh it, right? Whether we're grabbing data monthly, every time we get a new bill, or we're grabbing data every day, so we have a daily understanding of what's being spent. And then, of course, when you get into a TCO, right, if we just look at the raw cost of the individual cloud widget products themselves, right? We buy 10 units, the rate's X, there's the amount. But we have a lot of indirect costs, right, that are security related, that are infrastructure related, that are labor related, that are software tools and SaaS products. And we don't want to look at those just from a cash perspective. We have to be able to take the time as part of a TCO to amortize those costs. And that becomes a part of the TCO exercise. So some conclusions. As we went through all of this, and I've presented this content multiple times, even when we first did the research for it, it's pretty clear companies need both FinOps and ITFM, right? ITFM doesn't go as deep, and it's not as strong a framework as that laser focus that the FinOps framework provides for cloud. And that's good, because if you look across your spend portfolio, the two areas in your IT spend portfolio, if you look at all your categories, right? Telecom, infrastructure, on-premise, cloud, labor, new development, onshore, networking, etc. Without a doubt, probably one of the most inefficient from a cost perspective is probably cloud. So that FinOps being present and having that laser focus there is good. I think we've also drawn the conclusion here that integration is best, right? ITFM and TBM programs and FinOps being a component of it is the best way to go about it. Yes, only 8% of organizations out there are at that highly mature state, but integration is best. Alignment, though, is still good. We just don't want misalignment, right? Deployment is way ahead of management practices. I brought this up earlier with every time we have a new technology, whether it's virtualization technology or cloud technology, now it's AI. Organizations are just buying and deploying before they've put in place a management practice, right? And here we are again, right, with cloud, and we're about to be there with AI. So that leaves us with significant optimization opportunities exist. There's greenfield here, right, for everybody, right? These programs are worth the investment. And then the last topic before we kind of jump into a couple questions here, is FinOps is talking about expanding. So as I talk to industry analysts in the space, it is a framework that has done really well in the cloud space. So they are looking at taking the FinOps discipline and saying, hey, why can't this framework and discipline apply to AI, right? Why can't it apply to on-premise infrastructure? Why can't it apply to anything that's really IT spend related? I think we're very early in that process. You know, that framework expanding is that's not going to happen in weeks or months. That's going to happen over years, right? So if you're looking at how to manage these two things, I think you have to get your arms around them and FinOps as it is now, right? But understand that they are, as an organization, looking to expand. So appreciate it, everybody going through all that. I'm going to, Gavin, try to jump into some of these questions that I see on here. Is there a particular order that I need to grab these, Gavin?
Yeah. Hopefully you're hearing and seeing me now, Rob.
I am.
Yeah. Jump in actually with the first one, which I think is, you know, a good one, and maybe not surprised that it came up, which is, could you explain the difference between ITFM and TBM? And I was at the TBM conference in San Diego last month, and also at the IT Financial Management Association conference earlier this year in Santa Fe. And I would say you'll hear a lot of the same topics and even the same people at the ITFM conference and at the TBM conference. You know, how can I demonstrate the value of IT? How can we do more to make IT more transparent, etc.? I think the confusion between the two becomes because there are really two distinct aspects to technology business management. One is the TBM taxonomy, and the other is the TBM framework. And so the TBM taxonomy is just simply how you group and allocate your technology spend. And there are lots of different taxonomies and approaches to how you would do that. Nicus, for example, can support the TBM taxonomy, but the TBM taxonomy might not work for every company, as it might not align closely with how you run your business. I think when people say how much they love TBM, they're probably less talking about the taxonomy and more talking about the framework. And you can find out more on the TBM Council website, but the framework incorporates ITFM, as it also incorporates FinOps and ITAM and a number of other aspects. However, what I would say is most of the boxes in the TBM framework require ITFM to work, right? So although ITFM would appear to be just a part of that TBM framework, I would argue that IT financial management powers most of what takes place inside of technology business management.
Yeah, I think, Gavin, I think that's a really good response. I think that what I'll add to it is two things. One is, one of the ways that I think of TBM and ITFM is I think of TBM as being much broader and ITFM as kind of being a component within it. That's just kind of an observation and the way I think about it. But the other observation I have is if I go to customer A and I say, are you doing ITFM or are you doing TBM? And I go, okay, we're doing ITFM. And I said, okay. And the other customer is doing TBM. And I say, okay, well, what do you both do? And they both do the exact same things. They say, we do these 6 things. Well, that's because it happens to overlap in a lot of cases. So I think that's part of what makes it look the same. And
I think another aspect of that is that obviously, historically, technology spend was all in IT. I think, you know, over recent years, with growth of cloud and SaaS applications, technology spend has bled a lot outside of IT, which is why technology business management, you know, even as a title for the practice, makes a lot of sense. And even going beyond that, people are thinking in terms of now enterprise business management and how am I managing, you know, in a similar way, larger enterprise assets. Rob, next question for you. For someone who's looking into other aspects of IT software and hardware management, what do you advise? Also, we'd be glad to get a list of organizations that can provide training for this. So they're obviously focused on ITAM specifically.
That's interesting. So some of the other aspects of IT software, hardware management. I'm processing the question for a little bit here. And I'm afraid I'm making a little bit of an assumption about what's driving the question. More broader management of IT assets, looking at and connecting to maybe software asset management or hardware asset management, and managing the full life cycle of assets around hardware assets, and obviously managing the software portfolio a little bit better. I kind of feel like the finance element of that, or the ITFM TBM element of that, there's kind of a Venn diagram, right? Where you kind of have the operational management and focus of hardware and software assets. And then you have the finance focus, who's really trying to make sure they can manage everything from depreciation and amortization to forecasting, new purchases of capital assets and deployment of new software, and trying to manage, the software portfolio from a forecast perspective. And there's kind of an overlap, right? Those two disciplines in a Venn diagram, if you can imagine, kind of overlap.
There's a little bit more clarity there on managing the full life cycle.
What's that?
There's a little bit more clarity from our question there. Wants to learn about managing the full life cycle. And we could probably just mention briefly, Nicus partners with ServiceNow. So we have all of our applications deployed on the ServiceNow platform. Obviously, ServiceNow is one vendor that provides an ITAM platform for doing hardware and software asset management. And those two things obviously connect very closely to what we've been talking about today with IT financial management.
Yeah, and I think a good way to think about, or the simplest way to think about a life cycle is, there's certainly, it's important to understand the fully burdened cost of an asset, right? And we all understand there's a lot more to delivering, a hardware asset or software asset to the business than just the cost of the asset itself, right? We understand that part. And it's important to understand, that full cost. But then another element that's useful is the life cycle, right? What does it cost to actually acquire and deploy a particular kind of asset? What does it cost to do the fulfillment? What does it cost to actually part with that asset, right? Either in a timely manner or in an early manner, right? And having an understanding of each of those stages of the life cycle, which, it's a different life cycle for software than it is for hardware, and software are different. People are different, right? The cost of, acquiring people and onboarding them and training them and departing with them and all those different types of things. So understanding those costs gives you an opportunity to obviously create efficiencies, right? And then in certain disciplines, you look at something like IT asset management and looking at hardware assets, addressing tech debt, which is a big challenge in IT organizations. So getting the asset level TCO, and being able to drill into that data and identify where tech debt is and root it out, and try to phase it out, and target it to reduce risk to your organization and optimize, the spend portfolio. Those are all really valuable things to do, bringing those disciplines together, right? And that's part of what Gavin's talking about as we bring our ITFM product lines and cost modeling capability onto the ServiceNow platform, being able to merge and create that Venn diagram to be able to drive those types of things.
Hey, Ross, let's bring us back onto today's topic then, on, more specifically on FinOps. If I don't currently have a FinOps practice or strategy, or an ITFM practice or strategy, where do I start, right? And maybe we throw TBM into the mix as well. What should be the starting point?
Well, that's a great question. Where do I start? I think you start with what outcomes you really want to drive with the program, right? What is important? And I'll tell you where I got this from. I talk to prospects all the time, not just customers. Gavin said my role is a chief customer officer, so I engage our customers very heavily, and I understand what they're all trying to do with their ITFM, TBM, and FinOps programs. They're all similar, but they're not all exactly the same, right? So what is your program if you're going to stand it up? What does it have to deliver in terms of outcomes to your organization? And you can usually get those answers in the office of the CIO and CFO, right? And understand what their initiatives are and how an ITFM, TBM, FinOps program would be valuable to them. You connect to that. And I will tell you this, the prospects and customers we have that effectively connect what their programs do in terms of outcomes, okay, to what the C-suite's objectives are for the enterprise are the organizations that, number one, get funding for the people, process, and tools that it takes to be successful with these programs. And two, they get the executive buy-in so that they can really drive their program and be successful. Now, of course, that's somebody new jumping in. The other thing that can be challenging is it could be a moving target. My role as a customer officer is we a lot of times, too often maybe, within our customer base have new IT leadership, new CIOs, new CFOs, and they have new agendas, they have new plans, and our customers need to adjust their programs to align with what the C-suite wants in terms of, what's top of mind, right? And just a couple quick examples of that, right? One of the slides that, we talk about and we put in front of C-suites is we say, which one of these three things do you care about? Driving efficiency, driving value, or optimizing cost? And they all give the first same answer. It's sort of like, oh, we care about all three. Of course, everybody cares about all three. But what's the one that matters to you most in the world you live in right now? And they will all ultimately say, based on where their business is, maybe where the CEO and the board is, which ones of those things are important. So hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And let's do one final question to wrap up. What tools do you recommend for aligning ITFM and FinOps, especially in an organization that has decentralized IT cost management?
So we're saying decentralized, the situation is decentralized ITFM and FinOps.
Yeah. So
how do I get them together?
What you use to align them?
I'm sorry, you were breaking up there for a second, Gavin.
Right. What tools would you use to align them?
I'm not sure I understand the tools part. I'm thinking you're meaning what actions would you take to align them?
Yeah, it could be software tools, but it also could be taxonomy tags, right?
I think it's more a methodology thing. So first of all, and you're gonna have a hard time getting me off of this opinion. First of all, I think they need to be together organizationally, right? If I was a CIO and I got the job and my FinOps and ITFM were separate practices, I put them together, okay, on the org chart. But if I wasn't in that position and still wanted to be able to influence that, I think the communication and alignment between the programs becomes critical. We don't want to be inefficient and have duplicative work, and you're doing some work related to optimizing cloud and I'm doing something different. We need to be doing the same thing, right? So I think communication and understanding what both programs do is probably what I would do next if I couldn't put them together. And then I'd also want to make sure we kind of had a consistent face with the customer, right? Ultimately, whether I'm in IT and I run FinOps or you're in IT and you run ITFM or TBM, we're both servicing the business, right? And we need to kind of be communicating together and try to drive the same results.
Great. Hey, Rob, thank you so much for your time.
Yes.
We'll wrap up here. And I will just say in closing, obviously, I can see from the questions we have people that are at different points in their journey when it comes to IT financial management, FinOps, and technology business management. So wherever you are in that journey, whether you are just starting out and looking for help and advice on what it takes and what it looks like to get that up and running, whether internally or externally, or maybe you've got a practice in place and you don't feel like it's delivering value to the organizations and could do with maybe redirecting or reevaluating, we would love to come alongside you, partner with you, help you. Yes, we're a software vendor, but I would say first and foremost, we're about trying to deliver outcomes for our clients. That's what we care about. That's what gets us up in the morning. So if we can help in any way, reach out via our website. We would love to hear from you. We will be making this recording available. So if you want to watch back and have a look at the slides, we'll make sure we get those to you over the next few days. So thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.